First, welcome that you take the time. We appreciate that very much. Firstly, I would say some logistic things. So if you have questions, please write them in the chat or in the Q&A in Zoom. And there will be a Q&A session in the end where we answer all questions that have been raised, if time allows. The meeting itself will be recorded, and everybody who attends will receive the slides and of course the recording, just for a matter of note-taking for you. Yeah, so next slide, please. We're in the middle of this public consultation phase for the standard. Today with the webinar, we're having 9 days that are left to give feedback. Until the 26th of January, you will receive an email with a feedback form to give us further feedback. Very briefly, who is behind the Nature Value Consortium? So it's a cooperation of the project developers Waldklimaschutz Schweiz, Switzerland, and Trilly and Silver Consult as the originating provider of the methodology. Waldklimaschutz Schweiz and Trilly is using the Silver Consult forest carbon standard. So Dr. Roberto Schmidtke, who was the original author, but also Professor Hasenauer from the Institute of Silviculture in the University of Vienna, Simon Cendlik, who is the managing director of the Association of the Waldklimaschutz Schweiz, and myself, I'm one of the founders and managing directors of Trilly, and Moritz, who led the project and is our regulatory expert. So why are we doing all of this? Just as a brief reminder, so up to 20% of the global human-made emissions are from the AFOLU sector. And the AFOLU sector means the agriculture, the forestry, and the other land use. For example, when rainforest is cut down and turned into soybean land, and this deforestation alone is 45% of the total AFOLU emissions. And so as a result, it's obvious that nature-based solutions are extremely important and indispensable. Not much known compared to Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. Article 5 makes a precise statement on the relevance and the call to action for sinks and reservoirs of CO2, specifically with forests. And that's what we aim to deliver. So the whole idea was to come up with this nature-based, this standard for nature-based solutions, specifically forest projects, came from the fact that next to the big global standards, like Verra Gold Standard, there is nothing really available in high quality that allows to do smaller projects like they are available in Europe. And so there has been a fragmentation of efforts, and we took a step on that because Waldklimaschutz Schweiz and Trilly, we already have roughly 30 projects, 60 projects that are certified and operating in multiple countries. And we opened up the standard to attract more project developers to join us. And of course, we want to get in the fast track to the ICROA certification, and then later down the road also with ICVCM and EU CRCF once this becomes relevant. For buyers, it should resolve question marks on validity, quality, and so forth, and give them an easy possibility to understand the high quality of the projects that are driven by the standard, and thus unlock investments into nature-based projects, specifically forest projects in Europe. So I'm handing over to you, Moritz, at this stage.
Thank you. So our solution to this challenge was developing the nature climate standard. It's been created to give all of the great nature-based projects that we have in Europe a good governance framework that operates according to international norms and standards. And we've developed it together with different stakeholders from the voluntary carbon market ecosystem, among them scientists, project developers, resellers, but also NGOs. Quickly, where do we get the name? So nature, because we really see living ecosystems as key to combating climate change. Climate, because we want to take a holistic view. So beyond carbon, we also want to bring value to biodiversity and also SDG contributions. And then the standard, because we of course want to commit ourselves to rigorous norms and procedures to create transparency in the market, but also trust. Now, again, to the focus, we're really looking at Europe and addressing the challenge here. The project developers who are listed with the NCS already cover 6 countries and around 250,000 hectares of forest area. And our focus is really the LULUCF sector, so land use change, and forestry, where we focus on living ecosystems, starting with forestry. Now, how does the standard relate to methodologies and to projects? The standard is a top-level organization that sets requirements for methodologies, projects, but also modules, and then certifies methodologies and certifies projects against those methodologies. The methodologies, on the other hand, are a blueprint for projects to calculate and verify the climate impact of those projects. We will be presenting 2 methodologies today. One of them is impact improved forest management, which is our methodology for retention and so for conservation and enhancement of forest stocks in managed forests. And then we also have forest nature reserves, which is a methodology that stops harvesting completely on a certain forest plot. In addition, we also have some optional modules. These can be flexibly attached to methodologies, and there's 2 types of them. On the one hand, there's country modules, which we will present an example of a country module to you later in this presentation. Country modules are there to adjust and tune the methodology to the specific national regulatory conditions, but also to different forestry conditions. Then we also have co-benefit modules, which is if you want to certify a positive SDG contributions or a positive biodiversity contribution. For a project, this means they have some combination of requirements from the standard, then from the methodology that they use, but also from any modules that they might use. That they fulfill these requirements is checked by a VVB, validation and verification body, which is a competent and independent third party that ensures that the requirements that the project needs to meet are being fulfilled. Now to the contents of the standard, there's quite a lot. So we're starting with methodology requirements. So we have requirements around the certification of methodologies. We have requirements for the consultation. We also set rules around when methodologies need to be updated, what contents they need to have. But we also set requirements for projects. This includes which sorts of documents do projects need to keep, how do they engage stakeholders, and of course, what sorts of information do they need to make public to guarantee transparency of the project. Then we move on to validation and verification requirements, where We set requirements for verifier competency, so they need to show certain qualifications. We define the validation and verification process. We have procedures to manage conflicts of interest between VVBs and projects. There's a rotation of the VVBs, so that means one verifier cannot be on the project for an extended period of time. And of course, we have VVB oversight on the part of the standard. So the standard is empowered to look at the documentation and the processes of the VVB to see if they're doing good work. Then we get to the section crediting. Crediting is basically everything that has to do with the carbon credit itself. So for example, what information does the credit need to contain? But also two very important pieces are the reversals and buffer pools, and also no double counting. And so if we look at reversals, a reversal is when the carbon that is stored by the project is released back into the atmosphere. This might be in a forest project due to a damage event, like for example, a forest fire or a bark beetle infestation. And this section sets out the rules on how to deal with reversals and when to activate the buffer pool. So 15% of all credits that are issued by all projects are put into a shared buffer pool, which can be activated or which ensures against any losses of carbon to guarantee the integrity of carbon credits that might be sold. And then no double counting basically means, on the one hand, no double counting with respect to the Paris Agreement. So the carbon credit we sell cannot show up in two different national inventories that report to the UN. But it also means that a ton that is stored can only have one credit attached to it. That credit can only be owned by one party at a time, and it can only be retired once. And then governance is really the rules that apply to the standard itself that are also publicly available, as are all of these requirements. And here we have rules around managing conflicts of interests, how are decisions made, how do the different procedures work. Importantly, we also have a grievance mechanism. So if somebody feels like a particular project or a methodology or even the standard itself is not fulfilling the requirements set out by the standard, then there is a mechanism for people to share that grievance. And now, since we can't go through all of those in detail, we took out an example that I will present to you, which is around the methodology requirements and the certification process. So a methodology needs to do three things to be certified. It needs to have an independent ISO certification against ISO 14064-2. Then it needs to comply with all the additional NCS requirements, and it needs to undergo public consultation. So ISO we really put at the heart of the standard because it's a proven and adaptable framework, but also because it was developed by multiple organizations in an international effort. And so it forms a consistent basis that can also be compared to other projects elsewhere. Some of the important requirements that ISO sets are requirements around the project description, which is also the PDD, the project design document, which is the core document of any project, but also rules around baseline setting and many other things. Now, the NCS has deepened many of those rules. We've built upon them, but we also added some new things that are not covered in ISO, but that are really important for climate projects. The first and most important is additionality. So the concept of additionality means that the climate impact that we certify, that the standard certifies, has to be additional to what would have happened anyway without the project. We based those requirements around the ICVCM core carbon principles, which is the highest quality label in the market at the moment. And there's around two types of additionality. There's project level and standardized additionality. Project-based means for each project, you have to perform a set of additionality tests that the project needs to pass, and then it's considered additional. Standardized is one level above. So at the methodology level, you do the additionality tests and you define the activities of those projects as additional in general. And so if the standardized additionality test is passed, then you don't need to do it for each project. Then we have environmental and social safeguards, which basically means no net harm to the environment or society as a result of the project. And then we have the permanence risk assessments, which is also a core piece. Permanence means how long is the carbon credit valid and how long is the carbon considered to be stored. And so all projects need to have a risk mitigation plan where they identify possible reversal scenarios and mitigate those. And then we also have requirements around the public consultation of the methodology, the certification process, independent governance, which means that the standard is allowed to make changes to your methodology. It's also allowed to pause or withdraw your methodology if there are valid concerns. Also requirements around transparency. So your methodology needs to be discussed publicly. It needs to be available publicly, and certain information of the projects needs to be made public. Finally, we get to the public consultation. We have, on the one hand, an expert consultation where the methodology is checked by our expert network. And if there's consensus among the experts that the methodology is suitable, then it goes on to public consultation, which is at least 30 days. All comments must be addressed and the consultation needs to be accessible and transparent. In our case, this means we do a webinar in German and also in English. We have the documents available in German and also in English, and therefore maximize the participation. And now I hand it over to Dr. Hubertus Schmidtke, who has managed to join in the meantime, the author of our two methodologies.
Yeah, hello everybody, do you hear me?
Moritz, kannst du die Präsentation teilen?
Yes.
Moritz, hörst du mich?
Yes,
Okay.
We can hear you, Hubertus.
Okay, fine. Okay, so I'll introduce you to the new methodologies. Next slide, please. Yeah, up to now we have two methodologies under the nature climate standards. One is the impact improved forest management, which is in the managed forest, and we have a forest nature reserve methodology, which means to stop any harvest activity. Next slide. Thank you. Some words to the history. We started in Switzerland quite early. In 2007, we had a first project in a nature reserve, and in 2010 we had a first project in the managed forests of Oberalmain Corporation Schwyz on 7,000 hectares. And with these first projects, we developed the concepts of our two methodologies. In 2019, these concepts of these previous projects, they went into the methodology on projects in Switzerland. So this was quite Swiss specific. And then in 2023, we opened the methodology to be used in temperate zones. And Then the Swiss methodology from 2019 had to be revised and updated, and there were new requirements from the market and international developments. And so the update of the Swiss methodology and the update of the Silva Consult methodology was joined into the development of this new nature climate standard with these two methodologies on managed forests and on forest reserves. What I want back, please. What I want to say, we have not developed now methodologies from the scratch. They are based on previous methodologies, and they are quite robust and working. And currently, there are 250,000 hectares under these previous methodologies. In Switzerland, it's 30% of the forest area is in such projects. Next slide, please. We had a steering committee accompanying the process. It was organized by Wald Klimaschutz Schweiz. That is an organization which all Swiss projects are members. So in Switzerland, the projects are organized in an association. And we had in this steering committee, we had scientists, forest owners, project developers, and resellers. Next slide, please. Core principles. We have to consider core principles. These core principles, they are not forest specific. One is conservativeness. This is maybe the most important one. This means that the climate impact of the project shall not be overestimated. This is absolutely crucial for us because in the forest, we are not so accurate. We don't know exactly the stock. We don't know exactly the growth. We don't know exactly the harvest. So in certain steps of our calculations, we have to choose the safe side to be conservative. So this is especially for forestry projects, very important. Additionality, the project would not take place without revenues from the sale of carbon credits. We don't do an individual additionality test normally. Forest owners commit to forego part of the possible timber utilization for 30 years. So this is quite a long-term commitment into a possibly negative economically situation. So the additionality is based on this commitment. Leakage are negative effects of the project, and internal leakage is avoided by there is a requirement to declare all the forest area you have, forest owner or forest enterprise. You cannot say half of my areas I do a climate project and the other half I harvest more because of that. So that is not possible. We can no, back please. We can exclude areas from the project in a conservative way. If there are damaged areas with very low volume, they can be excluded, or unproductive areas can be excluded, or areas up to sale. It's always the question if it's conservative. Next slide, please. What are we accounting for? We account for carbon, and you may know these carbon pools in forests. This is quite common. We have the living trees, we have deadwood, we have shrubs, litter, and soil carbon. The methodology allows to account all the carbon pools if they are measured. And up to now, only the living tree biomass is accounted for, because the measurement of the other carbon pools is quite is not done, or is on project level not feasible. To exclude these other pools is conservative because they align with the standing timber stock. The soil carbon, to exclude the soil carbon, is a big contribution to the conservative approach, because soil carbon is half of the total carbon of the forest, and to not consider this is a contribution to this conservative approach, a big contribution to that. Next, please. Now, the first methodology, impact improve forest management. It means the conservation or enhancement of stock. You compare a baseline stock development without project and a project scenario stock development with project. And it means the partial waiver of possible harvest. And you can interpret this as an extension of the rotation period. Next slide, please. What is the baseline in managed forests? We say the baseline is the common practice. Common practice is a very strong term in climate terminology. What is common practice cannot be accounted for. So what is the common practice and what is additional to the common practice? We say in one approach for the baseline is the tendency or the striving for the normal stock. The normal stock is a model stock of even aged forests, an ideal model. This normal stock, and striving for the normal stock that can be taken from yield tables. That is one approach to get the baseline. Another one is stock management in models with close to nature forests from literature, and we have in the mountains we have framework values of timber stock in different vegetation types. I'll come to that later. What I want to say is we use scientifically based assumptions and recognized practice. Next slide, please. This normal stock, so this approach of the normal stock is quite important. If you have mainly young stands and your average stock is below, you can't account for climate change, for the climate effect of the project, because we say it is common practice, it's business as usual to strive for that normal stock. If it's in balance, you may increase the carbon stock above the normal stock that you can account for, or if you are above the normal stock, you could reduce it to the normal stock, but if you avoid that, that can be accounted for. We can, a forest owner can divide the project into projects according operating classes. If you have different conditions, you can divide that in sub-projects. Next slide, please. So again, stock changes below the normal stock cannot be accounted for, and reforestation is, in our view, not an additional climate protection project. And we are talking about temperate zones in Europe, because normally you have legal reforestation obligations. If you do nothing, there is natural succession. So reforestation for us is not an additional project type. And but during these operating class considerations, we can exclude, for example, damaged areas from the project area. So we can help that to some extent. Next slide, please. The normal stock is determined by tree species, yield, class, and rotation period. And all three determinants may change now in the context of climate change. We may have a change in tree species composition, a change in growth, and we adjust rotation periods. So this can be adjusted on project level. So we have a standardized baseline determination, and we can individually, project-wise, adjust the parameters. And what you can account for is increase timber stock or preserve timber stock only above the normal stock. But this is not unlimited. We say it is maximum 15% above the normal stock, because if you have much higher standing timber volume than the normal stock, the risk increases dramatically. So there is quite a narrow band of stock change that can be accounted for. Next slide, please. In the mountains here in Switzerland, we have such a framework for recommended stock values for the vegetation classes from colline mountain to subalpine, and you see here these frame values, and so we can use the left figure as the lower model value and the right figure as the higher model value. So in between these frame, we can have increase of the timber stock, or we can have preservation of the timber stock. Next slide, please. So again, quite simple. If you have the normal stock in your forest, you can increase that. So this is the left graph, and the right one means your current actual timber stock is above the normal stock, and you could reduce that as common practice. So the light blue shows the baseline. You could reduce the timber stock according common practice, and you would do it anyway. And if you avoid that reduction completely or partially, you can account for preservation of a carbon stock. So the blue area, that's the sum curve of the project. Next slide, please. This is a concrete project in Switzerland. You see the black line below. That's the low model value. The orange line is the upper value. So in between that, we can have a project. The actual timber stock is above that, and now the forest owner obliged not to go below these 360 cubic meter. So this is below the upper model value. There is a reason for that. So there is a certain distance, a certain space between the obligation to the actual volume. So there is some space and a buffer if there is any damage or calamity that may reduce the timber stock to some extent. You see the green colored part, that is the sum curve of the project of avoidance. Next slide, please. In projects in the managed forests, we have two carbon credit types. We have removals. If the timber stock is increased, so if actually carbon is taken from the atmosphere, that are removal credits, and we have avoidance credits when we avoid emissions from the timber stock in the forest. Next one. The monitoring in the managed forest is quite usual. We use forest inventories, as we know that, and we need 2 forest inventories during the 30 years of the project lifetime to adjust the project calculations. We need, and yeah, next slide. And these inventories, we use the inventories forest owners normally use. We try not to demand for a special inventory for the project. If there are inventories, we use the present values, and the inventory method is not defined by the methodology, but in any case, you must have a defined accuracy of your inventory. And the benchmark is sample plot inventory, standard error 5%, and confidence interval 95%. And in case the error is larger, we have to look if this can be healed by conservative deductions. Next slide. Yeah, so from year to year, we carry forward the measured stock. Volume at the end of the year is volume at the beginning, plus growth minus mortality minus harvest. So we take this data from the usual data of the company. Next slide, please. Risk and permanence. We have to consider the risk. No project in high-risk situations. The project assumptions must be realistic. We cannot do projects, I say, in a situation with 600 millimeters precipitation and spruce and 100% spruce, and half of it is already gone, and you cannot do a carbon project in high risk situations. No certifier would accept that. Then 50% of the carbon credits, they go into a risk buffer, and this is a shared risk buffer of all projects. And this risk buffer can be used for loss of standing timber volume through no fault of the owner. That is important. So unintended loss, then this buffer can be used. Next slide. Now we come to the second methodology. It's on forest nature reserves, the complete stop of harvest activities. Next slide, please. It's always the same. You compare a baseline, stock development without project, and a project scenario, stock development with project. And the difference can be credited. Next slide, please. The establishment means that there is no further harvest, a complete stop of any harvest activities. The duration of the project is at least 50 years, and the areas must have already at project start an timber volume stock that is equal to the normal stock. Then the The requirements for such areas is according these European guidelines for protected and productive forest areas. And our projects are in that category 1.2, minimum intervention. So minimum intervention means that for safety reasons along traffic lines, for example, you can cut trees, or if you must avoid a calamity, and hunting is allowed, and a minimum subsistence use is also allowed. So that's the typical situation for our reserves. Next slide, please. Now, what is completely different to the project type in the managed forest is that we do not measure the timber, the carbon stock. We don't measure it. We only use conservative model assumptions. This is very different. And the basic assumption is that the equilibrium stock in the nature forest, in a natural forest, is twice as high as the equilibrium stock in a sustainably managed forest. In the managed forests, in the ideal model, harvest is equal to growth. And in a natural forest, mortality is equal to growth. But the standing timber volume, the equilibrium stock, that is different. The natural forest is twice as high as that one of the managed forest. Next slide. To explain this a little bit, you see here the timber volume development of mountain forests. One generation is over 400 years, and you see in the graph above the development of the timber stock. But what is important, the generations, they overlap. You see that below. The generations, they overlap quite a long time, and so the stock will never go to zero. Next slide, please. On the left side, you see here on the left side several forest generations, and if you add the timber volume of one stand, and you have this wave in the lower graph, and if the larger the area is, so narrow becomes this oscillation at the end. In a large area, you have these carbon stock of 800 cubic meter in a natural mountain forest. The same situation managed. You see on the right side, you don't have 400 years of rotation, but 100 or 120 years, and the average stock is just half. Next slide. And because there are no harvesting activities, the monitoring concerns only the protection status of the project. And the forest owner confirms that there has been no harvesting, and the certifier, he may come every 5 years to confirm that. Project duration is 50 years, and the crediting period is 40 years plus 10 years of monitoring, and you get exposed removals. Next slide. Here is a summary comparison of the two methodologies. The measure is reduced harvesting in the impact forest management methodology and zero harvest in the natural forest. And this reduced harvest means extension of the rotation. The monitoring is very different. In the managed forest, we have to collect all these data from the forest owner. and in the nature reserve, we only monitor the status of the project. And yeah, the foundation, we have periodic inventories we have periodic forest inventories in the managed forests, and we have these model assumptions in the nature reserve. Carbon credits types in the managed forests. If we increase the standing stop, we get removals, and if we avoid harvest, we get avoidance credits. In the nature reserve, we only have removals. These distinctions between removals and avoidance I don't like very much, but it's a market requirement. And the certificates are credited only ex post annually or periodically. So this is my presentation on the methodologies, and I would like to hand over to Andreas Gabriel. He will show a country model, and a country model is not compulsory. You can handle country specifics also on project level, but country module helps to summarize all country specifics, and so the development of the project is much easier. So I would like to hand over to Andreas.
Thank you so much, Hubertus, for this presentation. Modules are add-ons, as Hubertus told us, to existing methods. They are used for the additional specification of part of these methods. This can be, for example, country-specific features, such as the definition of specific conservation factors. This can also be additional specification that refer to national systems, such as eco-points in Germany. The idea, this module standardize and simplify the project development process and are therefore helpful. I will be presenting the Swiss country module here on behalf of Waldklimaschutz Schweiz. Forest climate projects in Switzerland are organized via the association Waldklimaschutz Schweiz. Around 6,000 forest owners participate in the association, representing over 13% of the Swiss forest area. The Swiss country module is divided into an introductory preamble and individual contents. The preamble sets the scientific and methodological foundation and ensures that the activities of the Waldklimaschutz Schweiz Association are based on scientific findings. Further, I would like to address 4 topics out of the module. First, the project and baseline scenarios. The module states that the relevant authorities must be informed and consulted about the project as part of the project development process. For conservation factors, I want to mention national biomass expansion factors published by the National Forest Inventory are presented under conversion factors, so that helps us to calculate stem wood volume to biomass according to the National Forest Inventory. The same applies to harvest losses, where we get some tables which are applicable for national purposes. And then status of the forest nature reserves. The official status of forest reserves means that the Cantonal Forest Service monitors compliance with the rules that apply to the forest reserves. And this simplifies the project development and also the monitoring of these projects. Last but not least, earmarking of revenues. Earmarked use of revenues is mentioned as a voluntary option, but a monitoring indicator must be defined at this point. So that's the part for the module Switzerland. So I want to hand over to Moritz again for the questions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Andreas, and everyone for your presentations. Since we are a much more intimate round than in the German one, I would like to open the floor for questions. I've allowed you to speak in case you have any questions. There's no obligation to ask any questions, but in case there are any, please share them. Yes, I think you can unmute yourself, Clemence.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear
Yes,
you.
you can. You can hear me. So, unfortunately, I don't see the list of participants, so I don't know who is there. I know some of you, not all. And I just, first of all, I'm very happy to see that the project is very ongoing and that you enlarge it actually to the Europe. I really think it is very, very nice. I just have one question concerning the double counting. I saw it on your internet site actually that in each of the two kind of projects we have the same way to do with double to void. I said like this double counting, and you have three different solutions. And can you maybe a bit explain, just to be sure that I understand it right, what do you propose for these three solutions? You know what I am talking about, or do you want me to explain a bit more?
So are you referring to the variance between non-NDC crediting, NDC crediting, and contribution claim?
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yes, these three.
So basically, I mean, so the landscape is shifting a little bit with agreement on Article 6. So we will probably begin to see some rules and regulations around how actually voluntary market carbon credits can be traded between countries with letters of authorization. But of course, this is one of the three models. So you have, on the one hand, you have a non-NDC crediting model, which means the project activity is considered out of scope of the host country NDCs. This means that activities in that area are not recorded in the national forest, in the national inventory, let's say forestry. If the host country does not record forestry and report forestry emissions and removals to the UN, then I can, of course, easily sell carbon credits across borders, because it doesn't show up in the host country. It will only show up in the country of the buyer, if that the country of the buyer also has, if the buyer of the country records removals and emissions from the LULUCF sector, then it will show up if we're talking about a forest credit. This is the non-NDC crediting model, but that's going out of fashion because, of course, the NDCs are expanding all the time, and so more and more sectors are covered by NDCs. But this is basically how the voluntary carbon market operated until a few years ago. The NDC crediting model, this is the system with Article 6 and letters of authorization. So if I now generate a removal from forestry in Guatemala, then I need to go to the government of Guatemala and say, please give me a letter of authorization so that I can sell this to a company, let's say in Switzerland, who can then list this on their emissions balance sheet. This is quite a bureaucratic and complicated process, because there's a decreasing incentive over time for countries to issue letters of authorization. It looks a bit different in country-to-country relations. So, for example, Switzerland has a lot of agreements with other countries. The third model is the contribution claim, which means that the company that buys the carbon credit doesn't retire it in its own name. It retires the credit on behalf of the NDCs of the host country. So if I buy a carbon credit in Guatemala and I'm an Austrian company, I retire it for Guatemala. And in return, I get a claim to say that I have supported the global transition to net zero. So the claim is a little bit different, but essentially the NDC crediting model is quite complex because it's also tied to international and global negotiations. The non-NDC crediting model is quite simple, and it also prevents double counting because the credit isn't recorded in the host country. And then the contribution claim model, this is probably the simplest one because it doesn't matter what happens at the UN. It also doesn't matter if the credit is covered by an NDC or not. And these are sort of the three models. I hope I was able to, it's difficult to explain quickly, but I hope this answered your question.
Yeah, thank you. It answered. Maybe I will come back to you if I need more explanation once. Thank you very much.
Of course, always happy to help.
Thank you.
Great. Then looking at the time, unless we probably have room for another question. If not, I would hand it over to Christian to say goodbye.
Yes, so thank you very much for attending this webinar. We're excited to push this forward. If there are any more feedbacks, we look forward to receive them via the email and feedback forms you receive, or yeah, you can contact us also through the website. Again, thank you, and yeah, talk to you soon.
Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.